At 2:58 in the morning, my phone lit up for the 17th time. Same name on the screen, same knot in my stomach. And I remember thinking I can either get screamed at again, or I can hit record and finally let this woman hear herself. I put the call on speaker recording app running, and before I could even say hello, she came through the phone like a siren. "Logan, that gate is coming down tonight. Do you hear me? If you do not remove it, I will bury you in fines until you cannot afford to live here." My heart was hammering. My eyes were burning from being dragged out of sleep. But my voice did the one thing that has always quietly saved me. It stayed calm. And I said, "Pamela, it is almost 3 in the morning. Which exact rule am I breaking right now?" That one question, that one calm sentence in the middle of a 3 a.m. meltdown, was the first time in a very long life of being the quiet go-along-to-get-along guy that I did not just fold when someone with a little title leaned on me. And yeah, that sounds dramatic, but if you have ever been the kid people copied homework from and then blamed when the teacher caught them, or the co-worker who gets the mess dumped on their desk at the end of the day because you are so good under pressure, you know what I mean. My name is Logan Price. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my days following numbers that do not add up and building cases other people would rather not see. And somehow I still let myself believe that in my own life, the safest move was always to stay small. Apologize first. Keep the peace at my own expense. When I finally saved up enough to buy a little A-frame cabin in a lakeside community in northern Oregon called Silver Birch Landing, with gravel roads and birch trees and fog rolling off the water in the mornings, I honestly thought I had outrun that version of myself. I just wanted a place where I could work quietly, fish in the evenings, and not have to answer to anyone about the color of my front door. Of course, there was an HOA. There is always an HOA in these stories. Silver Birch Lake. Homeowners Association. A couple $100 a year for road maintenance and a small clubhouse. And when I bought the place, I flipped through the CC, and ours saw a lot of language about protecting property values and maintaining community standards. But nothing that looked insane, nothing that said, "By the way, one person gets to decide how much sleep you are allowed to have." I met the president, Pamela Knox, at a neighborhood barbecue, mid-50s sharp haircut, HOA polo shirt clipboard, practically attached to her hand, and a smile that never quite touched her eyes. She shook my hand and said, "I am Pamela HOA president, 7 years running." Like she was telling me she ran the whole county, then spent the afternoon marching around telling people their grass was too long, or their lawn ornaments were off-brand. I remember standing by the potato salad thinking, all right, you are intense, but if I pay on time and keep my place neat, we will just wave from our cars and that will be that. And for a while, it really was that simple. I worked from home, paid my dues online, quietly minded my own business, took my kayak out in the evenings, and tried to pretend HOA letters were something that happened to other people. Then a couple of boathouses got broken into a pair of kayaks, disappeared off a dock, and suddenly the neighborhood chat was full of grainy camera footage, and anyone recognize this truck? The sheriff sent someone to a meeting, and the guy basically said, "Lock your stuff. Get cameras." If you have one of those long, hidden driveways, you might want to think about a gate. My driveway is exactly that kind. Long and tree-lined, and completely invisible from the road, leading straight down to my truck, my tools, my boat, and a laptop full of client data. So my brain did what it always does. It started quietly calculating risk. And before I even called a contractor, I pulled up the CC and Rs and read them line by line like an audit. Every section about fences and structures said the same thing. The HOA controlled things visible from common roads or shared areas. My driveway curved out of sight behind the trees. My deed and the survey said that land was mine. And just to be extra careful, I went to the county office, pulled the plat map, walked the property line with an inspector who literally tapped a survey stake with his boot and said, "You put a gate here. You are on your own property. You are fing." So I hired a local guy. We put up a 6-foot ranch-style gate at the bottom of the drive, wood and metal, that matched the cabin quiet motor keypad on the post. Nothing flashy, just a simple line that said, "This is private. Please turn around." Up there, for about 10 days, my life felt exactly the way I had hoped it would. I slept easier. I worked with the lake out my window. I waved to neighbors walking dogs and did not think about rules at all. And then an email landed in my inbox with the subject line in all caps, "Immediate compliance required." The second I saw it was from Silver Birch Lake HOA. I felt my stomach drop, and when I opened it and started reading, my jaw went right with it. Pamela wrote that I had built an unauthorized structure, failed to seek architectural approval, disrupted the visual harmony of the community, and had 10 days to remove the gate or face escalating daily fines, and the whole thing was written like the verdict had already been read. For all the stern language, there was one thing missing. There was no rule number, no clause, no, "You violated Section X by doing Y," just a lot of standards and expectations she never bothered to tie to anything on paper. The first hour after I read it, I did exactly what every conflict-allergic piece of me wanted to do. I paced my tiny kitchen and thought about just taking the gate down, paying whatever fee they wanted, swallowing the humiliation, and calling it choosing peace. But that little voice that keeps me good at my job would not sit still. The one that says if it does not match the documentation, it does not hold up. I dug the CC and Rs back out, matched her email line by line against what the document actually said, and it was obvious private, non-visible improvements like mine were outside HOA control. And when they did have enforcement authority, it had to go through written notice and a hearing with a board vote on record, none of which had happened. So I did the most boring thing possible, which is usually the smartest move. I wrote back, thanked her for raising the issue, attached the county permit and the survey. With the property lines highlighted, quoted the exact sections that backed me up, even mentioned the break-ins, and the advice from the sheriff. Hit send and told myself, all right, misunderstanding adults will fix this. Her answer was 4 words: "This matter is not closed." 2 weeks later, a certified letter showed up. I signed for it on the porch, opened it at my kitchen table, and sat there, staring at a neat document from my own HOA, saying I supposedly owed $36,000 in fines, $400 a day, backdated to when the first post hole was dug. No prior violation notice, no hearing date, no mention of any board vote, just a giant number, and Pamela's signature, like it was some normal invoice. Every old script in my head woke up the one that said, "You are the easy target. Just pay something and make it go away." And I am not going to lie for a good hour. I seriously considered tearing the gate out and calling the whole thing an expensive lesson in do not stand out. Then something in me flipped direction instead of collapsing. I slid the letter into a plastic sleeve, dropped it into a binder, opened a folder on my laptop called HOA Evidence, and I started doing what I do for a living. I built a case. I logged every email, every comment, every phone call, with dates and times, and whether she quoted any rule or just barked about standards. I screenshotted the post she made in the neighborhood app about certain residents installing unsafe, unapproved structures that put all our property values at risk. Never naming me, but clearly describing my situation. And I watched as some neighbors piled on about selfish people, while a few kept asking the same simple question. Okay, but which rule did they break? And got nothing but silence. Then came that night with the 17 calls. The one I opened with my phone buzzing every few minutes on the nightstand, lighting up the ceiling of my little cabin. Pamela's name, front and center. And at first, I just let it ring, because I did not trust myself to stay calm if I picked up. But after the 5th call, I turned on the lamp, grabbed an old notebook, and started writing down times. Like I was tracking transactions. 47, 250, the gaps, shrinking desperation starting to have a rhythm. By the 10th call, the accountant part of my brain rolled back into the room and said, "Stop reacting. Start recording." So I opened a voice recorder app, set the phone on speaker, hit record, and answered at 2:58. Which is how I ended up with a crystal clear recording of my HOA president threatening to bury me in fines at 3 in the morning, while I calmly asked for a rule number she could not produce. When I hung up and saw that little red recording light still blinking for the first time since this mess started, I felt something like control, not anger screaming into the void. Just this steady feeling of, okay, now it is not just my word against hers. The next morning, instead of calling Pamela back, I called a law firm in town that handles HOA cases, set up a consult. And 2 days later, I was sitting across from an attorney named Rachel in a small conference room with my binder between us. I walked her through the email, the fine letter, the screenshots, the call log. She listened to that 3 a.m. recording with her eyes closed, took off the headphones, and shook her head. "Logan, this is not how an HOA is supposed to act. This is harassment and unlawful fines. She is counting on you not knowing that." Rachel laid out a simple plan that felt like a relief and a threat. At the same time, first we would send a cease and desist letter to Pamela and the entire board, spelling out every violation and giving them 72 hours to rescind the fines and stop contacting me directly. If they refused, we would use a clause in their own documents that lets owners call a special meeting if we get enough signatures, and if that still did not fix it, we would file in county court and let a judge listen to the same recording I had heard at 3 a.m. in the dark. The cease and desist went out. The 72 hours passed. Nothing changed. The fines stayed. Pamela left a furious voicemail about me, bringing outsiders into community business, which went straight into the evidence folder, so I printed the special meeting petition and started knocking on doors. Now, I am not the kind of guy who loves knocking on strangers' doors. I am usually the one pretending I am not home. When someone rings my bell, twice. But I went anyway. House to house with that binder, calmly explaining what had happened, showing the fine letter with the giant number pointing to the clauses in the CC and Rs that did not support any of it, and saying, look, if she can invent this out of thin air for me today, she can do it to you next. Over and over people said some version of, she fined us for our porch light. She made us repaint our shed. We just paid it because we did not want the drama. And I watched the same expression land on faces when they realized they had not been held to a standard. They had been bullied. It took 35 signatures to force a meeting. I got 39. The board tried to drag their feet. Setting a date, Rachel emailed them the state statute that says how fast they have to schedule it. And suddenly, The clubhouse was available exactly when the law said it needed to be. The night of the meeting, the room was packed. Folding chairs full, people standing along the back wall. That loud kind of silence you only hear when a whole neighborhood shows up to see whether the rumors are true. The board sat at a long table, Pamela in the middle, with her arms crossed, and her chin up, the others looking like they desperately wanted to be anywhere else. And after a short speech about misunderstandings and protecting the community, she said, "We will now hear from Mr. Price," like she was calling me to the principal's office. I walked up with my laptop plugged into the projector and kept it simple. A photo of the gate, the county permit, with the seal. The survey map with my property line clearly marked then. The $36,000 fine letter, reading the line about $400 a day, until removal, and you could feel people physically lean back at that number. Rachel flipped to a slide that was just my call log with a circle around that cluster at 3 in the morning and said, "These are contacts from your HOA president to my client about this gate." Then she hit play, and Pamela's own voice filled the clubhouse, threatening to bury me in fines and bring the sheriff, never once citing a rule. And then my voice, steady and almost bored, asking, "Which clause is that?" over and over. When the audio stopped, nobody said anything. For a long second, you could practically hear the collective, "Yeah, that is not okay." Then, one of the board members, Alan, leaned into his microphone and asked the simplest question in the world. "Pamela, did this board ever vote on these fines?" And she started talking about enforcing standards and not letting the place slide, and he cut her off. "That is not what I asked. Did we vote, yes or no?" And the silence after that told the whole story. Rachel slid a folder down the table and said, "We have a complaint ready to file, but Logan is not here to burn this HOA down. He is asking for 3 things. Rescind the fines, correct the false statements about him, and commit to following your own procedures from now on." You could almost see the math appear on Alan's face, a room full of neighbors who had just heard that recording. A lawyer sitting 3 feet away, an insurance company somewhere that would not be thrilled to pay to defend this mess. And finally, he said, "I move that we rescind all fines against Mr. Price related to his gate and issue a written statement confirming his gate complies with our documents." And another board member, Carol, jumped in with, "I second." Pamela tried one last time to talk about opening floodgates and troublemakers, but here is where the story really turned for me. Standing there, I realized I was not the troublemaker in that room anymore. She was the person who had been using the HOA as her personal hammer for years, and people were finally done pretending that was just strong leadership. They voted, 3 hands went up in favor. Pamela's went up alone against. And just like that, I went from owing $36,000 imaginary dollars to owing nothing from being the quiet guy everybody thought would roll over to the neighbor who proved you can be calm, collect your evidence, and still push back hard enough to change something. That is pretty much where I like to freeze the frame in my own mind in that stuffy clubhouse, with the board turning sideways to talk to residents, and Pamela staring down at her papers, realizing she is no longer the only one in the room who gets to say what the rules mean. But I am curious where you stop when you hear it. Where do you draw the line between reasonable community rules and straight-up bullying dressed up as protecting property values? If your HOA president called you 17 times at 3 in the morning over something you knew was legal, would you rip it out just to keep the peace? Or would you grab a notebook, start writing down times, and let the receipts speak for you? Tell me in the comments whose side you are on, what you think about people like Pamela, who honestly believe they are saving the neighborhood while they steamroll the people in it. And if you have ever been the quiet one who finally said, "No, not this time. I really want to hear that story too." Hit. Like hit. Subscribe. If you want more real-life HOA drama, and share this with someone who keeps letting pushy people run their life, maybe they just need to hear that staying calm does not mean staying weak. Sometimes, it just means you are giving yourself time to gather every bit of proof before you finally look them in the eye and say, "No, actually, you are the one who is out of line."